time. Thank you for joining us. My name is Cedric Fillmore. Thank you for joining us for I think this is our final session for the Analytics Frontier. This is our series where we've been focused on very specific topics around the future of data, topics that we felt were very relevant to where Allison is thinking about, where your minds are, things that you might be planning for in the future. Today's session, we're going to cover master data management. Again, you've probably seen me on a number of different sessions that we've done in the past. I'm the director for data analytics for Onebridge, about 16 plus years in the consulting realm, specifically in analytics, and have been an analytics architect for that time period. Joining us today to drive our conversation and content around master data management is Woody Failer. So I'll pass it over to Woody to introduce himself, and he will drive the rest of the content for this session.
Great. Thank you, Cedric. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, sir.
Great. Fantastic. Thank you again for inviting me today to Allison and the Onebridge team to present today on master data management. I'm Woody Failer, Senior Solutions Architect at Onebridge. Have roughly 25 years experience in data and technology, with most of that being in the data capacity in one form or another, from development in BI and ETLs all the way through to the topic today in master data management. Industry experience in hospitality, agricultural science, publishing, and automotive. Have recently joined Onebridge in the last year, and to bring my collective experience in and work with the Onebridge team. So thank you again. So our agenda today is around master data management. The first half is we're really going to talk about the fundamentals and what is master data management, what are the functional areas, and sort of the components to build a master data management environment, also known as MDM. The second half, we're going to move into a bit more around case study conversation, talk about the art of the possible, what purpose does MDM serve, what does it look like, and we even have a little animation to demonstrate how records are matched and merged in the golden record creation, just to give a sense of what that looks like. And at that point, we have some whiteboards if we want to go through and look at data, and then a Q&A session to open up the floor for interactive conversation. So let's begin. So what is master data management? So really what I wanted to do here is highlight, Gartner and Forrester bring out two good representations of what that is. And it's about the people, process, and technology for creating and maintaining a centralized repository of master data. So this is that platform. It brings together uniformity, accuracy, stewardship, consistency, and accountability of around your master data assets themselves. This is typically around product and customer and data quality, and all comes down to business process improvements. One of the key takeaways here is that MDM is owned and operated by the business for process improvements. IT is the implementation team, and they're the enabler. So without that business buy-in and that business engagement, it fundamentally will change the way they think and interact and see their data, and sometimes provoke thought beyond what they thought was really their business. It changes their business. We can talk about some examples of that later on in some of our use cases. Master data defined. So this is about the data itself. So what is master data? These are typically the nouns and entities that define your business. Core data within the enterprise that describe objects around which business is conducted. It's typically non-transactional. These are list of vendors, list of customers, list of products that need to be maintained that are usually dispersed across the organization, and folks are challenged with making sense around, well, do I have one customer or do I have 300 customers? They really don't know exactly as you look at your data holistically across the organization. This can also include reference data. So a lot of times it's pertinent information to your industry that you need a consistent list of descriptors that may be inconsistent from suppliers, vendors, or other business units, but you want a single definition. And we'll walk through some examples of that in some of our case studies as well. Data domains. So data domains are the key subject areas, the assets of the organization. So it's typically broken into these 4 areas and a 5th one that we'll touch on briefly, but customers. And customers are broken up into your customers, your employees, your partners, suppliers, if you will. You also have products. And products can be a bill of materials or your assets or your equipment, your supplies, or even the finished product goods. Maybe you're challenged with multiple sources defining the same product, but it has a different definition, a different image, a different title. You can bring that together to create a single product view that then ties back to your transactional or your procurement systems or whatever it may be. Locations. This is another area of defining the location of your assets, whether it be a property or a product, your facilities, franchises, stores, etc. What we found is an address. There's usually multiple addresses, if you will, as an example, that define a location. There was one case study I worked on where we had automotive dealerships. So you have your frontage sign address, you have your entry address, you have your delivery address, you have your transportation address, all representing the same location. And when trying to match and merge on that, you would have 4 or 5 different addresses. Well, we had mechanisms to be able to identify all of these addresses represent the same location. On other, so you can have chart of accounts, certifications, and financials. All of these define a master domain of a single source of truth for the organization from an enterprise perspective across the organization. And lastly, a data domain is reference data. So these are more custom and specific to the industry itself, as I previously said. It's also used to describe your other domains. So maybe you have a product, but within that product, you want to have a consistent definition of color or unit or a measure or currency or language or descriptors. We found in the automotive industry that you may see a Honda Accord isn't defined as a Honda Accord in every single model year. It's the different spellings, the different definitions, 4-door versus sedan versus a 5-speed transmission versus manual. You want consistent descriptors across your data, and this becomes important from your analytics and your product description standpoint. So reference data is typically a custom domain that allows any number of master lists, if you will, around the organization to be now centralized and shared across the organization. The MDM framework is driven by the underlying principles of data governance, and I think you've had the opportunity to have a data governance conversation in one of the other lunch and learns. But data governance is instrumental here in MDM because it drives a lot of the rules, the processes that are needed to have a successful MDM program. You need the organization to define who are the roles and responsibilities that are going to oversee the MDM platform itself. The policies and standards. So this is how we manage the data. These are the rules around the data. This is what's determined the requirements of what will be defined as a customer. So you might ask yourself, well, how many different ways is a customer defined across an organization? It could be defined differently in different business units, but then there is one overarching customer master rule that becomes instrumental in the MDM environment to say, this is how the industry defines their customers, as an example. The governance team will also drive your process. So how things are operated in the master data process, in controlling what's approved, what's not approved, how systems are integrated with each other, your supporting data from source system to MDM and back. All of these processes will be defined here, whether it be an analytical or an operational process, and we'll dive into that in a moment as well. Technology, this is enabling your implementation team. So it's typically IT or some variation of IT who's implementing your master data platform, and they'll drive the technologies, the architecture, the models, the designs, which will be driven by the requirements and the processes that are defined in the data governance. And lastly, measurement. So MDM is an ongoing living platform. So there's a constant shift in evaluation of data quality. Tracking the data quality as it's being changed and managed at source systems. Maybe an attribute is changed from a source system and it changes the data quality rules. Maybe a source system shifted from a 4-digit zip code to the 4 or 5-digit to the 5+4. That needs to be accounted for in the MDM system and the data quality management. It also sets the measures for match merge. Maybe out of the gate, you're going to strive for an 80% match merge rate, but over the next year, you want to move that dial up to 90%. You have a gauge to manage and track your master data quality level and output as you move forward. Another area might be if the industry says in the education business, there's 4,500 colleges and universities, but your master data customer record says you have 15,000. Now you have a benchmark in which you need to continue to move against and evaluate, well, why do I have 15,000 versus 4,500? You can use that measurement to continue to evaluate and make changes and adjustments to your platform to reach that 4,500 goal. In addition to the framework, it's really the people that make it happen, and this is a shift. So we talked a bit about data governance, and this really is about setting the standards and policies. So data governance, if you have an already established data governance organization, MDM can sometimes be an extension of that, or even led by that MDM or that data governance team. If you don't already have data governance, it's likely you're going to have a steering committee or a data governance small team is going to be defined anyway, because you need an overarching team to determine how do you define your rules, your processes, and your technologies, as we previously highlighted there. So by default, you're going to be moving into data governance. I've seen other implementations that didn't have a data governance program, and once implemented an MDM, they quickly moved into driving a data governance program. So they go hand in hand going forward. So with or without, you'll have some semblance of a data governance program, at least starting. Administrators, this is your IT and your implementation teams. This is what makes it happen. They're driving the actual platform to put it together into use, building the models, integrating the data, standing up the platform, doing the configuration. They're building the match merge logic, all of which we'll chat a bit more shortly, but they're enabling the business to then step into and define who are our data stewards. And the data stewards are the hands, the boots on the ground that are actually interacting with the data. They know who the customers are. They know what the products are. They know what products should be matched to merge. They know what the problems are in the data, and they can use the tools in the environment to improve data quality, define workflow processes, and do hierarchy management as examples. So looking at the framework itself, here we're going to get into the core capabilities of MDM. We briefly chatted about data stewardship, but when looking at that from a functional standpoint, this is the typically a user interface is designed for the business to actually interact with the data itself. This is where they can peruse the data to check for quality. They can do match merge on their own. They can unmerge records. So you've got a rule that merge two accounts together and they should be separated. The data steward can interact with that. Data stewards can also do a data extracts, or maybe they're interacting with a sales promotion and they need a mailing list of a certain profile of customer. They can interact with the stewardship tools to extract data out. The other side of data stewardship is with the IT team. So the IT team is going to be interacting with data either in configuration tools, or they'll be loading data, or they'll also be doing their own stewardship from the standpoint of quality checks as you move forward and testing the match merge logic. So stewardship plays an instrumental role in any MDM platform. It's really the eyes into the data itself. Otherwise, you have behind the scenes algorithmic logic going on and no one to actually see it until the output. This is your entryway into the data itself. Hierarchy management. So a lot of organizations really like this because it opens up on your master data a way to do groupings. It could be product groupings, it could be customer groupings, how you've segmented customers into sales tactical streams or marketing analysis. It can also be used for your sales operations to define your sales territories. So this allows multiple hierarchies to be used across the organization, as well as enterprise level hierarchies that are defined. It could be a view of how the business views their customers, or it could be another view of how the customers view themselves. Take a hospital, for example. You may have IU Health and all of the satellite locations across the country or across the state or even within a county. You could have a hierarchy of IU Health and then all of its subsidiaries, and perhaps even small branches beyond that. It just depends on how deep you need to go and what's required by the organization. Workflow processes. This is another value-added capability of many MDM tools where stewards have access to change data, but should they change data, or do they have the approval to change data? So some stewards may have the ability to change a price on a product and others don't. Other stewards have full access to change anything, or they can modify a name. So the workflow process kicks in that a steward goes in and makes a change that is then passed to a data governance official, if you will, and they can approve that change, or another data steward can approve that change. So it really puts in a chain of events on making changes, make corrections, or doing additions to the data itself. So there's oversight and checks and balances. And again, the data governance, we talked briefly about that. That data governance piece is really about defining the standards and policies for which the data will be implemented. This defines all the business rules, that defines the workflow processes, it defines what the hierarchies should be, and how the data stewards will interact. Integration. Integration can be as simple as a batch feed from a source system or a batch feed to your BI data warehouse, or it could be as robust as real-time services, whereas data is being changed to the source, it's immediately changed in and managed in MDM. It could even be a feedback. It could even include microservices, which we've seen become more popular for doing a search before create, if you will, in a transactional system. Does this account exist in MDM? Do we already know who this customer is? Why recreate a duplicate when we already know that customer exists, and our MDM system can be the master for that? Data quality, and this is instrumental in your MDM platform. So data quality defines standards, improvements, consistencies in the data itself. One of the most popular examples is the address and city, state, and zip. You'll see every permutation from that when you start looking at transactional systems, and data quality can do address lookup and verification and standardize on the address, whether you want it to be all capitals, you want to use abbreviations in the street and boulevard and township designations. All of that can be defined and configured and set as part of the standards that the data governance has put into place. So now you have consistency across all your data, be it your address, be it names, be it product listings, any attribute that's being mastered in your platform. Matching is where the magic happens. So here's where the algorithms will pull together and do matching across. Take a customer as an example. Maybe you have multiple duplicates in a source system, and then you start bringing in multiple source systems, and you have every permutation of Woody Failer across all those systems. Maybe there's 10 unique records. The matching goes through an algorithmic process in multiple iterations of matching on name, first name, last name, city, state, zip, address, perhaps even an industry ID if I'm a member of a particular industry, or a tax ID. All of those could be used as part of the algorithm to match and identify multiple customers. It even goes through and corrects misspellings. So if my last name is misspelled, or if they just had Woody FAL instead of my full last name, an algorithmic tool will go through and do a best match with a certain percentage of accuracy. Data modeling. So this goes into really what's determined the strategical alignment and approach of the organization. So data modeling will determine what implementation style and architecture will be put in place, what domains and what those domains look like going forward, and then how that data is integrated into those models, and then what's required to be fed back out to the operational systems across the organization. So we'll see some examples of that momentarily, and we're going to deep dive into implementation styles and architecture. The non-functional side, This is also based on what's determined is required for the organization from an architectural perspective, so performance and high availability. If you're doing batch processes for analytics, you probably only need to do, you don't need high availability. But if MDM is instrumental and part of the critical path of your operational and transactional environment, maybe you need a search before create or a lookup on a product during a transactional order, then you need high availability. Scalability is really about the depth and the breadth of where do you plan to scale the MDM platform? Are you going to go with multiple domains? Are you going to continue to add depth of data? All of that is both part of the non-functional of where you need to plan for going forward on your MDM platform. So here we're going to move into the implementation styles. There's two primary styles that are often considered in an MDM platform. One is analytical, the other is operational. Analytical is just that. It's a view of the data that is used for your BI, your data science, your machine learning, so you have a consistent source of customers, products, whatever the domain might be. This is typically a pretty standard implementation, and usually some of the most popular implementations across organizations, because they've put such a focus on data as an asset. They really want to understand what they have before they move forward and make any other adjustments. But equally as important is the operational side. So the operational MDM is really more about having a consistent product list or a consistent customer list, but is critical to the operations of the organization. There's a conversation I'm in right now with an organization that MDM is instrumental in taking product orders. So there's a lookup in their MDM environment to confirm that the product exists, make sure it has the latest descriptors and pricing, and then that is updated in the transactional environment itself. Without that, they're dependent upon the transactional system to maintain that inventory list, which may or may not be updated in a timely manner. Integration patterns are part of the underlying architecture for MDM. So there's typical 4 integration patterns, all serve different purposes, all can be interchanged and developed and grow. So registry is more of a legacy. This is really about capturing lookup IDs or source IDs across the organization. It's not as popular as it used to be, but it centralizes your data into a single location based on source system IDs. Unfortunately, it does put a lot of strain on your transactional systems, because once you do the lookup, you have to go back to the transaction and find the customer or the product or the metadata you're interested in. So it's not as popular as it used to be. But similar, and kind of to replace that, is the consolidated view. And this is the most popular when doing an analytics model. So it brings the source system data from all the sources into a centralized location. It's perfect for a BI, a data science, because now you generate your multiple domains in a master list, and that's typically fed directly to your BI teams or data scientists going forward. It's the fastest, it's the simplest to implement, and it gives you a good sense for what the quality of the data is and what those domains are across your organization. As you move into coexistence and centralized, these start moving into more of your operational models, but still equally is used in BI and can coexist, if you will. But this is moving MDM as a system of record with a flexible data entry. So the point of entry on a record could exist in MDM or at the transactional system. So it requires that two-way street, if you will, of feeding data back and forth on a timely manner between MDM and your transactional environments. Centralized brings MDM as the source of record, and all updates, all entries, all new records are created in MDM, and it's pushing out those updates to your operational systems. And this is becoming a popular model because it streamlines the process. It puts MDM as a center of focus across the organization, and you can ensure that when an update is occurred and controlled and mastered in MDM, it's going to feed out to the organization in all its operational environment. So thinking about it, looking at a MDM platform and evaluation, a couple tidbits here to think through and bullet points I've highlighted to consider is time to implement. And this really goes down to, well, what tool you select, what's your cultural environment, what your IT environment and your business is willing to take on or needs to take on. Obviously, time is money, so finding a tool set that has a quick turnaround, you're going to find tools that are self-contained, highly configurable, are going to have a quicker turnaround than tools that require a lot of custom development, are modularized, and probably connected to other product offerings. So that's a huge factor in thinking of an MDM implementation. I've seen implementations that go a year and a half, and I've seen implementations that can take 3 months, and all of it has to do with the environment as well as potentially the tools that are selected to do that. Data quality improvement, to me, this is an instrumental component of an MDM platform. Without it, you really risk being able to hit any level of accuracy on your match merge, because here you're really running through a quality control and standardizing all your data, be it address, as we talked about, or even attributes that are a reference list in the organization. You have consistency on color matches or weights or currency valuations. Now you have stronger data that will run through the match merge rules. So without data quality management and improvement, it's going to be harder to have a successful platform. Ease of use, as I said earlier, and similar to time to implement, looking for tools that have configuration management over development. You're going to have a time to implement much faster. Ease of use, you can even bring your business partners in to do some of the implementation, if you will. If it's easy to use, they can learn to do the configuration themselves and being part of that interactive engagement with the development team. Scalability and multi-domain. So some tools require a separate module to be purchased as part of the overall platform. Other tools, it's all contained and also support multi-domain. I could have product, customer, multiple reference lists all living in the same container, if you will, within a platform, where other tool sets require a separate implementation for each individual domain, walking through the same processes and the same configuration of data quality and match merge rules, and maintaining multiple environments. So a huge consideration when looking at a platform, multi-domain support. And that affordability begins to summarize a lot of these. So what's your culture environment? If there's ease of use and time to implement, and you don't need a large IT team, and more of the business can integrate, so the affordability there goes down, or as well as the multi-domain. So if you don't have to buy multiple implementations and implement those and host those, you've got one single platform. Integration, finding tool sets that have a strong integration, be it batch or real time or microservices to interact with the data. That's becoming more and more popular with tools, but there's also tools out there that sell those as additional add-ons or totally different separate tool sets that need to be purchased in order to integrate. So self-contained tools here is a huge win when looking at and evaluating tool platforms. And as we talked, stewardship and governance. So stewardship must be a primary component of any MDM platform. You need that mechanism to be able to peruse and see inside via some sort of user interface into the data itself. Without that, you just have a technical engine behind the scenes and no interactivity for the business to actually interact, make corrections, or provide feedback on the data itself, which is instrumental as part of the overall governance. In workflow management, this is becoming more popular as well. So as you have your stewardship and as you define these data governance policies and rules, workflow management becomes more important to guide you through that process with the approvals or the required updates, and it does the handoff from one resource to the next, all defined by the data governance policies and procedures. And of course, lastly, the whole reason why we do this is golden record management. So ultimately, you're striving for that source of truth, of that master golden record that will match and merge everything into a single product, single customer, single domain of whatever's being defined by the organization. You need a robust tool that keeps that domain as a single golden customer. There are tools that will take and fragment that out into multiple domains within their platform, and that becomes a more complex environment. So some of the benefits, again, customer comes to mind for everyone. That's really the top topic that comes into play when you originally start talking about a master data management platform. But your customer domain gives you that 360-degree view of your customers. What are they interacting with the organization? What products and services are they purchasing? Do they have customer service interactions that you've never seen before? Now you know that this single customer who's been interacting in a multitude of ways across all your different business units, you can see that entire view whether it's from an operational system, or whether it's through Salesforce, or whether it's through your BI environment, you now have that single customer view. Similar with products, you want a single product view across your organization. This is the second most popular domain in many organizations, that you now have consistent descriptions, consistent pricing, consistent control over what the product is itself, and that can be mapped and dispersed across all the organization business units and procurement systems, what have you, across the org. And reference data, interestingly enough, this can also be a first implementation. A lot of times organizations find they're struggling with, there's an analyst in every corner of every organization who contains a spreadsheet on their desktop that is near and dear to their heart. They are the steward of that data, and they're the go-to person for that list of data. They maintain it, they keep it up to date, but as soon as they mail that spreadsheet out, the data starts to break down, and it starts to get shared across the organization, other updates are made, and now you don't know who has the master list. The cool thing about a master domain is that this steward can continue to maintain that master list in a centralized location, but using the power of the MDM engine and the data integrations and distribution, anyone now can subscribe to that data, and it's always up to date, it's always trusted, and it's always maintained, which has become a huge value across many organizations, just in tracking product pricing and product details, as just one example. The other benefit is in your analytics. So as a precursor to deep analytics, data science is having quality data. And MDM really falls into that quality data alignment, so that I have now a source of truth. As an example, if I want to do an analysis on my customers themselves, I now have a complete view of what my customer interactions are, how they're interacting even in the market, if I want to bring in market data. Whereas before, without this quality data, I would have to manually bridge together and determine that I've got 15 records. Are these all the same customer? And as I aggregate those up, I have 15 different sub-records that I need to consider as rolling up into one. With master data and doing data science, I now have one record that represents my customer, and I can see that view in doing any type of customer segmentation, customer analysis, market segmentation. It becomes a strong source of truth, and then versus having a partial set of that data. So what to think about? A lot of times it's kind of overwhelming. Wow, there's a lot of data. But really, it is a small footprint of your data across your organization. It's your primary domain assets. So when you come down to it, it's a list of your customers, a list of your products, a list of your reference data that may have been sourced across many transactions, or even billions of transactions across your organization, but it may only come down to a few thousand or even a couple 100,000 records, maybe even 1 million. And that's a small set of data compared to your overall transactional environment, but usually the most valuable. So how does this all come together? How do we take all these pieces we just highlighted as the fundamentals and the functional area of master data management? So here's a little talk through that sort of puts that perspective together for us. So if we think about, we've got 4 areas here in our MDM in the center. We've got our CRM, our ERP, our supply chain, and our data warehouse. In our CRM, we've got 3 entries here for a distribution company called Creek Carrier. There's 3 Creek Carrier names, and there's 3 Deb Varchys highlighted here. So visually, we can see, yep, those are really all the same, But as far as our CRM is concerned, in any other environment, those are three distinct records already just in our CRM. What will MDM do is, using the match merge logic and the data cleansing logic, it will actually consolidate that down and dedupe and create a single master record called Creek Carrier Corporation, with our primary contact name is Deborah Varchi. If we take a look at our ERP, we now have Creek Carrier and Deborah Varchi, but there's additional data here that could be valuable in building our master record. This starts to move into a survivorship mode. So we can now populate the MDM environment with the email and the DUNS number to support the Creek Carrier and Deborah Varchi in MDM. So now our golden record is starting to grow and take maturity by sourcing across other sources of truth across the organization. If we look at our supply chain, we still know it's Creek Carrier, but if you notice, the address is different. This might be an outdated address, but we know from the ERP that the address has been confirmed from the last transaction. So MDM can now update the supply chain with the correct address. And then lastly, BI. So BI has now found there's 5 unique entries for Creek Carrier across the organization. And if I ran a standard report in BI, I'm going to get 5 entries in that report. So across my career, I don't know how many times I've seen the common request, hey, Woody, can we generate a report on customer XYZ? I need to see what their interactions are with the organization. Well, if you don't have an MDM and you have a multitude of spellings for a given customer or product or any domain, it's going to be a manual effort to generate that report. But with MDM, it unifies that and brings that together into that master golden record. And I can now report on Creek Carrier, which aggregates all of the underlying Creek Carrier records that have been captured in BI, which then relate back to all of your source systems. And I can do a comprehensive report on Creek Carrier as well as Deborah Varchi in BI. So where do we go from here? What's the call to action? So really, MDM, as I said earlier, this is a business operation. It's a business function. So you really need the business to engage and adopt this process. So we recommend starting with a business impact roadmap, a scoping study, if you will. And this will help define those compelling business use cases that are instrumental across the organization. Helps to secure funding, define your overall scope, and then gain that adoption of why you really need an MDM environment. It helps identify the opportunities, it helps identify the pain points, and it will show the return on investment. So if I've always had reporting that I've had fragmented results such as Creek Carrier, now I can see Creek Carrier comprehensively across the organization. That's much more valuable than it's been in the past, and it's delivered to me on a timely manner. So what do I do in a business impact roadmap? We're really going to define the what, why, how, who, and the deliverable of that. So it's build a compelling MDM business use case, align that more strategically with the business and their information management plan, interview your business and your IT folks to identify what are the problem points, what are the opportunities that need to be discovered. It also begins to unfold any of the domains that are important to the organization, and that's who and how with the technology and the business teams. At the end is a formal presentation that highlights an overall strategic business plan and the value of MDM across your organization. This could be as starting simple with an analytics and moving into an operational model, or maybe it's identified as a reference domain is the most important because your data is fragmented to describe your products. But then a business impact roadmap will help to uncover that along the way. So at this point, I've got a couple case studies to talk through. Are there any other questions or thoughts before we move into that?
Yeah, I mean, let me ask you. I mean, once an MDM system is implemented, I mean, how are organizations normally maintaining or enhancing or expanding the use of that? Are you seeing, projects every year? Are you seeing a dedicated team just to expand the usage of MDM? how does that normally happen with your customers?
Yeah, so I've seen both. I've seen designated teams, and those designated teams would handle all the new integrations. They handle the continued process improvement of improving on match, merge, and data quality. And then I've seen teams that have a smaller team with an analyst and maybe a manager, an interactive IT manager, and they rely on professional services to bring in and do that large expansion. So maintaining is pretty straightforward. You're continually just tweaking and tuning match merge logic. But to bring in a new data source, that might be a 3 to 4 person team or maybe a 2-person team, just depending upon the size and scale. But you need that ramp up time for 3 to 6 months maybe. But you don't necessarily need resources unless you have a long strategic roadmap of 15 or 20 sources that are just going to continue one right after another. You may not necessarily need that larger implementation team, but you definitely need at least 1 or 2 analysts that are capable of maintaining and tweaking and tuning the business rules as it relates to match and merge and data quality.
Yeah, I mean, so you are seeing a lot of people put dedicated resources to working with MDM, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And
Yeah,
those resources really also need to be an extension and really tightly aligned with the data stewards in the business.
yeah, yeah. I mean, and that's you. I mean, I'm sure you guys have heard that, but that's part of the pushback that we normally get is that, well, the business is running itself today. You guys want to add headcount to manage MDM. And I understand that there might be some benefits there, but trying to get the business to understand that the benefits outweigh the costs of adding additional headcount
Yeah,
just to manage something that they're already doing today, right?
right.
I mean,
So
that's a tough sell.
it is, but I have an example of that really turns that back around on them when they can see the value. So um, you may have additional resources, but you saved in another area. For example, there was an implementation that the primary use case was for analytics on customer segmentation, but the sales operations team, what we didn't realize is that they were spending roughly 3 weeks a month with 7 resources to manually compile out their sales territories to do their account management incentive plans, and then a week to actually compile that incentive plan, and then another week to actually handle all the disputes from the account managers. So they're roughly 5 weeks into a process that with 7+ people, if you will, just to do monthly incentive reporting on the sales team. Once they saw the results of the customer data, they started consuming that, and they were able to take what was taking 7 resources 3 weeks. They were able to run that report and have the output in less than a half day. So those resources were repurposed across the organization, and now the incentive was tied to the BI alignment. So they were able to run a report to consume all the mastered customers, run it through their Salesforce hierarchy that they then built in MDM, and align that with BI for the transactionals, and they had their entire sales report, incentive report in a day. So there's your compelling story on resource management. Now, are they willing to still recognize the need for resources? But that's part of the business impact roadmap, is surfacing those type of use cases of efficiencies, improvements, and opportunities where, yep, we may need an IT person here, but then you can save on business resources or reallocate those resources in other areas in the organization.
Right. Okay.
So those are exercises that, I've seen that before, where let's go in, let's implement an IT solution with MDM, and it essentially fails because you really didn't spend the time up front to do that impact roadmap to really understand what's the most value that the business can actually sink their teeth into and then really adopt, versus saying, oh, now I have another tool I have to use.
Right. Gotcha.
Any other thoughts on that?
No. I mean, that sounds good. It's just a matter of, finding that particular use case that's gonna generate that, making sure that those benefits do outweigh the cost.
Yeah,
And
it's
for
so it's
us, we've got 480 applications, right? Probably way too many.
right.
So, I mean, we're in this position of we put in Microsoft's MDM a couple years ago. We're trying to tackle the high priority items, right? That biggest bang for the buck.
Right.
And then, trying to get things done. They didn't want to give us a dedicated team to actually expand it. So we're in this position of trying to
Mhm.
justify new projects all the time to do those expansions,
Yeah.
or do these one of these things where it's kind of an opportunistic pick, right? So we're engaging on a project for another reason, and we can, part of that project is we will repoint to our MDM hub to pull a particular data entity, right?
Right.
Just opportunistically trying to expand that use. So that's kind of where we're at. But I mean, you also get into this thing of, well, you've got those 480 applications, and I have to embark on an integration to take those applications and repoint those to the hub. So I've got work on both ends to do
Yeah.
that.
Right.
Whereas if you just look at those 480 applications, it might make more sense to actually get rid of some of those applications and consolidate down and just use one application instead of three different ones that try to do the same thing.
Hmm.
And which is all goodness, but the problem is who's looking at that?
Yeah.
We've got people we call architects, sure, but in almost every single case, those architects are busy with new projects every year. So nobody's looking for opportunities. Nobody's looking for the best way to restructure these things.
Sure.
We've got so much other things we're trying to do. So it's just one of these things of trying to keep your head above water instead of trying to optimize what we've got, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, that's kind of where we're at.
Yeah, so a couple of things come to mind then, and again, I go back to the business impact roadmap of helping to truly assess that value, find these nuggets of business value that, as a simple example that I just shared, but um, you've highlighted what I'm hearing is a bit more of an operational type of MDM integration, and maybe that's too heavy for the initial start. Maybe there's a better use of an analytical implementation and let the results of that data fundamentally drive the operational needs. And another example that comes to mind there is one implementation I saw. The business was absolutely adamant about how they define a customer. So the MDM implementation went forward. It followed the data governance guidelines to implement that customer. And lo and behold, when they saw the accurate data, they realized that really wasn't how they defined their customer at all. But the reason that happened is because their data was so dirty, they didn't really realize how bad it was.
Yeah.
So we redefined it and made adjustments to that customer definition, and it fundamentally changed the business. They were driving it themselves versus kind of that secondary of, okay, I've got this MDM tool. They now realized they needed to make a change in how their operations work.
Yeah.
So there could be those types of nuggets that we can help uncover to identify organizational process change that they really don't know they have just because the data they're working with is so fragmented they don't even know how bad it is, as an example.
Right.
And
And I think you're right. It's trying to uncover those, business processes that could benefit from cleaner data, more structured data,
yeah,
a centralized enterprise data source, right? And I mean, we've got, and you guys are probably familiar with our setup, but we've got different architects that kind of support different areas of the business.
mm,
And it's their job to kind of talk to those areas of the business and uncover these things.
right,
Again, they're so busy with new projects, they're basically just going to the business saying, okay, what do you want to do every year?
mm-hmm.
And the business always has ideas of things they want to do. So we're just in this position where nobody's really looking at that.
Right.
So it's our own internal issues. Believe me, I'm with you.
Right.
Got to get people focused on it, right?
Sure. Exactly. And then some of the other piece to that, and I wasn't in the other sessions, but I presume there was a data governance conversation. And a lot of times that, as I mentioned earlier, MDM typically is an extension of data governance. So if that doesn't exist, and perhaps there's an opportunity for data governance to begin to grow, so MDM could naturally be the implementation model of the data governance.
Yeah. Yeah. We had some of those conversations during the data governance presentation, right?
Yeah.
Talk about some of those type of issues. But yeah, I agree with you. So many of these things, I mean, data quality,
Right.
kind of works in there too. So many of these things relate to each other. And I mean, we're kind of in this position where we're trying to identify what we've got. So what I've told, my management is that the first thing I would like to do is to push this data catalog concept so we can kind of define all the different data sources, what we've got out there, where there might be duplication, and then start talking about data governance on how we govern these identified things, right?
Uh-huh.
So it's just a matter of trying to get, somebody's attention and get on the priority list, right?
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, data quality or data cataloging is yeah, that falls right into the fold here as well, is understanding what you really have, the lineage and the actual usage, and what data is the most valuable. That's another component of this overall um, data frontier, if you will.
Yeah, exactly. All part of the struggle, right?
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, the only slides I have left are case studies, and I was blending these case studies into part of the conversation earlier on, so it would be somewhat repetitive. But I'm happy to break down any other ideas or challenges you have or considerations. And I think another one that I like to point out, and this is really starting to prove more valuable to organizations, is the reference data. So while customer and product is your general focus on a domain in MDM, reference data has become very, very valuable in recent years of how as you start to do that investigative resource, that Johnny's keeping this spreadsheet on his desktop and no one dares touch that thing because he's
Right.
the gatekeeper of that, but he's the only one that has it. That's valuable across the organization. So it doesn't have to be a stronghold customer or product domain. It can be these managed lists that are extremely important across the org.